Thanks, SOSV. There's been a lot of talk in recent years about nuclear power's renaissance. It's not the first time that people have predicted a comeback, but growing interest from data centers suggests that it might stick this time. A number of startups are racing to develop and deploy new class of small modular reactors that could deliver clean, reliable power if they can deliver on their promises. And now, just a quick note before we get started. Nucleation Capital is an investor in Aalo Atomics. But here we go. Rod and Matt, thanks for joining. Matt, let's start with you. Your company is one of those startups and maybe arguably the closest to getting a reactor up and running. You broke ground on your experimental reactor in Idaho this summer. How far along are you now?
Yeah, that's right. And first of all, thanks so much for having me on, Tim. I appreciate the chance to speak on this platform. But yeah, so we are one of the relatively newer entrants to the space, but we are moving very quickly. So what I always like to highlight is roughly 2 years ago today, we were still a two-person company. And today we are 100 people, and we've raised around $136 million. And as you said, we have broken ground on our first nuclear power plant, the Aalo X. So this is our experimental power plant. And part of what makes this unique is since the beginning, a couple of years ago, we've been pursuing DOE authorization for this first plant instead of NRC. And we have a very uniquely qualified team to do this approach. So some of our first 5 team members, including our co-founder and CTO, Yasser, he was the chief architect on that program, the Marvel program at INL, which was the first time the DOE had ever approved a reactor design for construction. And so, from our perspective, the DOE authorization was always this great way to kind of harken back to the first atomic age when there was no NRC and there was no DOE, but there was the AEC. And it was under their watch that all the first kind of test reactors got built. And they tried all sorts of different technologies and kind of iterated towards different types until PWRs, pressurized water reactors, became the prevalent tech of the day. But right now, we're working on advanced reactors. These use other coolants other than water, and they have certain benefits around mass manufacturability, inherent safety. I'm sure we'll talk more about this. But we are pushing one of these designs forward. And right now, we are on pace to achieve criticality, which means turn the first power plant on in around 10 months. So super exciting. And would love to elaborate, but that's the intro.
Yeah, that's great. You mentioned DOE versus NRC. For those who aren't kind of steeped in the nuclear world, what are the practical considerations for that difference?
So the NRC is kind of the traditional regulator that has been around since the 70s and regulated a lot of the designs that have been operating and the few that have been built in that time period. And the kind of short answer to your question is NRC is for civilian land, DOE is for government land. And so, if you're deploying commercially, traditionally, NRC was the main way to go. However, as of this past summer, there were some pretty interesting developments in the space. The Trump administration, with the Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, put out these executive orders that are kind of changing the game when it comes to nuclear. And it's really a reflection of this realization that we really don't want to lose to China and Russia on AI and nuclear. And so they're saying, hey, maybe we can actually use DOE authorization to deploy commercially at gigawatt scale on DOE land nuclear plants directly powering data centers. And the idea there is it could be a more streamlined pathway to get these newer technologies built faster in a safe setting on government land under DOE authorization. And so that's kind of this new thing. This started this kind of race amongst 10 nuclear companies to attempt to achieve criticality by July 4th of next year. That was part of the executive orders as well, all under DOE authorization. So when this happened, we were very excited because we've been doing DOE authorization for the past 2 years. So we, felt it was very serendipitous, and we're, full steam ahead towards turning this first plant on as fast as we safely can.
Yeah. Now, when you do the DOE authorization, you get the first plant built. Are you also going to be pursuing NRC authorization so that you can do wider deployments?
Yeah, that's a great call out. So we have engaged the NRC already as well. So sorry to throw so much industry jargon at you, but we submitted our regulatory engagement plan, a number of topical reports and white papers. So these are the typical API methodologies of the NRC with the reactor developers. And so we've been engaging them in parallel. And the kind of interesting thing is one of the kind of common ideas in the industry is that it's been difficult to get the NRC to approve these newer advanced reactors because they're so used to regulating the water-based designs. And there's been this sort of almost catch-22 where they want you to have nuclear test data before they grant you a license, but you can't get that test data without a working reactor. So the DOE offers a way to kind of break through that that freeze and get the test data, get something built. And so, the idea is these are happening in parallel. DOE, we think, will get approved first, and then that will help expedite or answer any final questions the NRC might have around the operational characteristics of our final design.
Yeah. So when talking about your design, it is different from existing ones, but it's based on one that came out of a national lab. So there is some design history there. And then you're also focused on mass production. So how are you making parts for this new power plant that you're going to build in 10 months?
I think that's a great call out. So Marvel, as we spoke about, was occurring at the Idaho National Lab. It started in 2020. Our co-founder, CTO Yasser, was the chief architect on that program. In 2023, it achieved the historic DOE approval. But what Marvel was really a kind of a scaled down test reactor. It was 100 kilowatt thermal in size, and so it's really not the right product for data centers. So we took the knowledge on how to go through DOE authorization, and we're applying it to a product that is much larger scale and kind of purpose-built for these data centers. And really we were fortunate in the sense that we started a little bit later because we could do what a startup is meant to do, which is go talk to customers, ask what they want, and design around that, instead of taking an existing design from 10 or 20 years ago and hoping that it fits. So the net result of that is what we call the Aalo pod, which is a 5-reactor, 1-turbine configuration. Each reactor is 10 megawatts electric equivalent. So the total output of the plant, the Aalo pod, each pod is 50 megawatts electric. And so that is what we are, pushing through with on the NRC side. The Aalo X is actually 1 reactor, 1 turbine. So it's like a pod just with 1 reactor instead of 5. But you can imagine once you've proven 1 reactor, it's relatively straightforward to do a few more. And so, that's been our approach. And we found this really resonated with customers. One more thing to highlight that I think you really aptly are questioning is there's been this term small modular reactor, SMR. And we have kind of a spicy belief that this has never really been done properly. And if you look at the way that both small modular reactors or large modular reactors have been done in the past, you have a parent organization that designs the reactor, and then they outsource to dozens of suppliers who, in their factories, they make these various modules. And then they try to assemble on site. And that's often where challenges happen because these different factories from different companies made all these modules and they don't integrate super well. So what we're really trying to do is vertically integrate as much as we can without trying to bite off too much more than we can chew given our size, and really take raw materials into our factory. What you see behind me is just our pilot factory, 40,000 square feet. We'll be building a much larger one as we scale. But then outputting from this single factory, 80% of the modules needed to set up one of these power plants. And we really see this as the solution to what's held nuclear back, which is a fear of cost and schedule overruns. So, what better way to solve that than having a single factory that can predictably produce these modules and these power plants on schedule and on budget?
Yeah. So that model that you have behind you, is that what you're essentially going to take and make bigger for the commercial scale for the 5-to-1 pod that you're discussing?
Well, depends on what you mean by behind me, because this one is the vessel. So this is just one of 35 modules that is shipped per reactor, per pod. So, this is actually what goes in here is a lot of the internals. So the nuclear fuel, the sodium, some of the heat exchangers, pumps. But then there's a number of other modules that we make for the balance of plant that also gets shipped. And that's all happening here in this factory. And the idea is we just want to scale that up very soon. So this 40,000 square feet is good for the Aalo Zero, our non-nuclear prototype, which we've already built, the Aalo X, which we've been talking about, where it's our experimental power plant turning on next year, and then the first few commercial pods. But the bottom line is we really have to turn nuclear on its head, because right now it takes 10 years to build a gigawatt scale nuclear plant. And we need to be able to build several gigawatts per year in our factory. And that's really what's required to even stand a chance at servicing even a fraction of the demand from these data centers. We're talking about 40 gigawatts in the next 5 years is a somewhat conservative estimate in the US alone. So that is our objective here.
So this sounds really similar in some ways, and I think maybe you've made this comparison in the past to aircraft manufacturing, right? Where you've got kind of a bit of a bespoke product. It's not exactly, a sedan rolling off the line in an automotive plant, but the goal is to be able to churn out several dozen of these a month, potentially. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, probably by 2030, our target would be 100 reactors a year. So one every few days. Yeah.
Yeah. Rod, one of the things I've always been wondering about the small modular reactor approach is how much of the cost of a power plant is really wrapped up in building these parts? Or I guess to put it another way, like how much will mass manufacturing realistically reduce costs of a, final reactor?
Mass manufacturing has the ability to reduce a lot of the cost, not just for the cost of putting it together and the labor involved, but also the cost of carrying the project during the period it's being built. The interest cost associated with building a very large mega project, something like the Hinkley C, covers about 60% of the total cost of the reactor is interest that is accumulated during the time of construction when you are not generating any revenue. So moving faster reduces that. Moving faster gets you to revenue faster so that you're able to start using your own income to build more product and build that supply chain. There's an enormous benefit to starting to build in series rather than one at a time and have each one be a product that takes 6 to 7 years, because there's no real learning associated with, or not very much learning, because the guy who pours the concrete for the foundation, if he does it once and then does it again 7 years later for the next unit, you don't get much learning involved. And I should say the team, of course, not the guy.
Right. So you're looking at not just reducing upfront costs in terms of the manufacturing and the total cost per megawatt, but also it sounds like there are many knock-on effects that go down the line.
Sure, there are. And one thing to be clear, there is always an economy of scale, but scale can be achieved in more ways than just building huge units. You can achieve scale like Aalo's doing, where you build a lot of units and you deploy them in a way that you can achieve scale on site, maybe by having 10 Aalo pods on a single site, for example. I don't know if that's in their business plan or not, but that helps you achieve scale as well. But the other piece of this whole shifting from only one size, and one size doesn't fit all, with the extra large reactors that we built before, the only customers were large utility companies. Nobody else would buy those plants. And that's a customer base that's kind of follow the leader. Either they're all buying or nobody's buying. But by going to smaller sizes and having a variety of smaller sizes, I mean, there are people designing 1 megawatt reactors. By the way, there's even some that are down in the kilowatt range, hundreds of kilowatts. but 1, 5, 10, 20. I mean, we review business plans all the time with sizes all the way around. And what it does is it's filling out your catalog. It's providing different customers an access point because each group of customers may have different needs. The nice thing, though, is once you start building them, the other sizes can start encroaching on each other's areas. But that's good for customers.
Yeah, yeah. Matt, you mentioned that your ultimate design is going to have 5 reactors around a single turbine. Can you explain the thinking behind that? Why not just build one 50 megawatt reactor?
Yeah, so it kind of comes down to high availability. So you have to refuel a nuclear reactor every couple of years, which can be an outage for 2 to 4 weeks. And so the idea there is instead of having a single 50 megawatt reactor and having you lose all that power every 2 years, by refueling the reactors one by one, you then have what's called N+1 or N+2 redundancy. And that allows you to maintain power and only lose a fraction. And so when you kind of extend this to an entire fleet of pods, as Rod was saying, you actually then have redundancy not only at the reactor level, but also at the turbine level. And that's where it really gets interesting because these hyperscalers, what they really care about is speed. And there's a few things that can slow them down. One is if it takes 10 years to build a gigawatt scale plant, that slows them down. And so if you deploy a fleet of these smaller reactors, you're able to build them incrementally alongside the data center. Because the way that these data centers get built is in these 1 or 200 megawatt data center shells. And each of those takes 9 months to get built. So if you can deploy an Aalo pod at that pace, instead of waiting 10 years for a full gigawatt, you can monetize those expensive GPUs incrementally along the way, which makes way more financial sense for these customers. And so it's the speed and the redundancy that this model really unlocks. So that's the key.
Yeah. You mentioned something interesting there that I wanted to touch on, which is that data center operators, obviously, they want power yesterday, right? And the next best option is tomorrow and the day after that and the day after that. And so how quickly can you get to a gigawatt scale?
Well, right now, the competition is definitely natural gas. And there's 2 main things there. There's the speed and there's the cost of it. And right now, some of the 2 biggest data center developments in the country, the OpenAI project in Abilene and the Memphis Grok XAI project, they're natural gas primarily powered. And so the question is, well, why not just keep doing that if it can, for now, be cheaper and faster? And the answer is because while there is low-hanging fruit for a few gigawatts, there is not 40 gigawatts of pipeline and fracking lying around unused. So that's really the competition, is how long does it take to do new fracking, do new pipeline? How much will that cost? And this is our kind of Goldilocks, moment of the window being open to get our factory set up, come down the cost curve, get things going faster. So right now, with the criticality milestone of next summer, that would be pretty historic to achieve. And that's a very fast timeline. And that's showing that these things can be set up on the order of, 1 to 2 years for the first few, and then come down to probably a matter of months for, once you're really pumping this out of the factory. So that's the way this is going. And there's a lot that really is supportive of this. We could probably go in a different direction here, which is on the regulatory side, how that's changing and in flux and allowing for faster speed. But it's a super exciting time. And I think there's a good chance that this AI data center movement can help bootstrap these nuclear gigawatt factories, which, then, by the way, can go after so many other amazing markets. Because data centers are 4% of power in the US, 1% globally. There's a lot of other energy that could be serviced by these types of products if only this kind of factory existed. So we think it's a super exciting time.
Yeah. So, are you able to put a date on that gigawatt, or is it somewhat dependent on the regulatory process?
Our goal is to reach a gigawatt of deployments by around 2030.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, so that's pretty fast. Rod, is the fuel side of things ready for this?
It's getting ready. Obviously, there's not been any real development before the last couple of years in producing the fuel, because if there's no customers, there's no interest. Up until the time when we stopped wanting to buy enrichment services from Russia in 2022, there was an oversupply of enrichment. Oversupply meant that the enrichment companies weren't making any money. They were running their centrifuges and basically giving away the SWUs, just able to charge enough to keep the lights on. So they weren't investing in new. They are now. I just saw an announcement that Urenco has doubled an already planned expansion. They're going from 750,000 SWUs in Netherlands to 1.5 million SWUs. And that's just a technical unit term. Okay, I don't understand what a SWU is, but just remember, it's a unit. Okay, and it's the unit that enrichment is being measured in. There's plans to start really digging into recycling fuel. That's going to take a while, but that's another alternative. There's lots of developments in the fuel category. There's going to be some times when reactor operators are going to pay more for fuel than they were paying 5 years ago. And if they don't pay more, the development won't happen. But there's going to be some price increases. But in nuclear, the price of fuel is a relatively small portion of the total cost. It's somewhere down for conventional reactors. It's down around 10% of the cost.
Yeah. Now, one of the things I think that's kind of lurking in the background here is AI, of course. Maybe not so much in the background as the foreground, right? A lot of AI is driving what we're seeing in terms of data center development, increased power demand, and then, of course, that spills over to interest in the nuclear industry. And obviously, tech companies are happy to pay a premium at this point for power to get their data centers moving. But what if the AI bubble bursts? Where would that leave you guys?
Well, first of all, as Matt said, there's an awful lot of electricity customers outside of data centers, and I almost cringe when I keep hearing people repeating data center over and over again, seeming as if they're the only customers that want reliable, clean electric power and heat, by the way. I don't think that data center collapsing is going to really harm the industry. It will remove some of the froth that's existing today. Their data centers, to me, are sort of like the people that would buy Tesla Roadsters. They're the early adopters that's going to allow this market to just get untracked. And they're already doing that. There's already capital coming into the business and getting companies like Aalo and a number of others up and running. And so if that peters out, there's going to be some pain, but it's not going to stop this thing from happening. Because there's an awful lot of other customers out there. We see customers like Dow Chemical, like Nucor, which is the biggest electric arc steel manufacturer in the world. Many others that I see in meetings all the time expressing their interest in nuclear energy.
I think I would add, it definitely wouldn't be the end of the world for all these energy companies, nuclear and otherwise, because this is not just a nuclear thing; it's across the board for energy. It is true that the grid did somewhat stagnate in the U.S. for a few decades, but now we're seeing this growth. It is largely driven by AI. At the same time, there is a natural turnover in a lot of energy infrastructure, and there will certainly be other markets to go after. But we have to acknowledge that this AI movement is creating a much faster change than otherwise would be happening. And so I think maybe Rod said it well. What I would just add is maybe we can try to assess what is the likelihood of this bubble bursting and what does that look like? And my view is this is very analogous to the internet in the year 2000, where on the one hand, there were a lot of things that were overvalued, and there certainly was a financial bubble that burst. But if you look at a graph of usage of the internet from 1995 to today, you can't even see the bubble because it was such a transformative technology that just kept driving so much change. And that you didn't see any downturn in the usage of it. And similarly, the infrastructure build out, they did get a little bit ahead of their skis at a time, but they got caught up and then some, right? So, so we kind of think of it in an analogous way where AI is potentially a more transformative technology than the internet in terms of how much it can do for humanity, how much good it can do. And so, is there a bubble? Yes. Is this the beginning of something way bigger? Yes, in our view. So that's kind of how we assess the risks going forward.
Yeah. Rod, you mentioned it's a bit of froth in the market. As an investor, how do you determine what's froth and what's real?
Well, one thing to remember is that we are private investors. We're private company investors. We're venture capital. So we're putting money into companies way before they're actually entering the public markets. The froth I see is in some of the public markets. Now, in the private space, there is capital coming in. We don't think there's too much capital coming in yet. People are expressing interest. Just when we started a little over 4 years ago, started investing. When we were raising funds, almost none of the typical venture capital participants, endowments, pension funds, et cetera, were interested in nuclear at all. Most of them had nuclear on a prohibited list. They would not invest in nuclear. That's changing. The World Bank is starting to invest in nuclear. The European Commission has put nuclear into their sustainable taxonomy standards. There's all kinds of things happening. And by the way, if the World Bank moves, all the other international development banks will start following that lead. And so things are happening, but there's not froth in the private sector yet. Some people say there's too many new entrants, but hey, I like going to a grocery store and having the choice of a lot of cereals. So yeah, we don't know yet, and it's not time yet for us to narrow that down. We'll let people succeed in the market and then decide which ones are not succeeding.
Yeah. Well, we only have a few minutes remaining, but I wanted to get on this idea that it seems like, and I might be exaggerating here, but more has changed in the nuclear industry in the last 5 years than the last 50. And you both alluded to some of those, but what are some of the big take-homes here?
Well, from our perspective, I think you're absolutely right. Right now is a record good time for nuclear on a 70-year basis. And it's really a number of things. There's record levels of government support with the executive orders and really bipartisan support, even from Biden's administration. There was a lot of good initiatives that carried over from there. There's record levels of public support. So you're seeing an immense amount of support across social media, which I think doesn't get acknowledged enough in terms of the role that plays, but a lot of influencers doing crazy things like, holding their pregnant bellies up to spent nuclear fuel or nuclear waste casks, to show that, dispel some of the myths surrounding that kind of thing. Record levels of venture capital going in. And obviously, as Rod was pointing out, in the public markets as well. And then, lastly, we've spoken about this, but record levels of support from the right customer to start this movement again. And so I think it's really about, the next 2-3 years under this administration with executive orders, having the support from the customers continue in the venture community and the public support, all of this coming together to really help push this underdog technology forward. Because that's a big part, for me, of what got me into nuclear. Growing up in Ontario, and I used to have asthma, breathing problems. They went away when we turned off coal, went into nuclear. And I studied nuclear at university. And it seemed so hard to start a nuclear company, especially after Fukushima, which happened when I graduated. But eventually, came around to it again, and it just, it was such an uphill battle. Even 3-4 years ago, when we were still shutting down gigawatt scale nuclear plants. And so the fact that now there's been such a tide turning in the past few years is incredibly exciting. And we think it's just going to be an amazing future with nuclear.
I agree. I have been participating, observing, writing about the nuclear industry for almost half of that 70-year period. I started doing this and writing about it in 1995. started my nuclear training in 1981. It's a great time to be in nuclear. It's the confluence of support, customer interest, finance, a lot of knowledge that we've learned over the years. We need to bring some of the nuclear trained people that are out there in other industries back into nuclear. Been a lot of people, really sharp people who learned all about nuclear and then left the industry because there was nothing for them to do. No growth, no career path, no incentive to stay around. People who want to build things, they left, but now they can come back and build in nuclear. And I know for a fact that Aalo has been attracting people from all kinds of industries, people who want to build and have proven that they can build. And those are the kind of people that we need to get back in nuclear. We're great in the U.S. at operating nuclear plants. We've got that down to a science. There's been a lot of work on that. We can refuel reactors in less than 2 weeks in some cases. We operate them with a 90+% capacity factor. This summer, the Constellation Energy Company announced that they operated in the summer with 99.1% of their fleet during this 3 months of intense demand for electricity in the summertime. That's a record that nobody else can do except nuclear. So there's lots of reasons why I'm really excited about nuclear. I kind of wish I was Matt's age, but there you go.
Well, it sounds like the next few years will be fun to watch. So, Rod, Matt, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thanks again.